Hop.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so thanks a lot, Melanie, for the invitation. So today my talk will be about how we can use eDNA and metabarcoding techniques to understand the evolution of symbiosis. And so as Melanie has just said, it's some works that I have done during my PhD, so between the ENS and the National Museum of Natural History in Paris. And so during my PhD mainly focused on host-associated microbiota, so the microbes that are associated with animals and plants, and more especially into the bacterial microbiota that are present in the gut of animals, and in the mycorrhizal fungi that are present in the root of plants. And this microbiota that are associated with animals and plants, they are very diverse with different species that are present, and they participate in the functioning of these organisms. So for instance, for the animals, we have these bacteria that are present in the gut, that are involved in the digestion of food, that are involved in the protection of the organisms, and also in the development of the animals. And it's the same for the plant. So in the mycorrhiza, actually, it's an organ that is formed inside the root of the plant. So with the mycorrhizal fungi that are present in this part of the root, and there are nutritive exchanges that are going on in the mycorrhiza with mineral matter, especially water, that is gathered by the mycorrhizal fungi in the soil, and this mineral matter is exchanged against organic matter through the mycorrhiza. And mycorrhizal fungi are also involved in the protection and the development of the plants. So there are many different functions that are where the microbes associated with animals and plants are involved. And so the idea was to try to understand how host microbes interaction evolve through time. And so, for instance, over a short time scale, what we can do, we can look at the microbiota assembly. So we can compare the microbiota of the parental generation with the microbiota of the new host generation. So the microbiota of the new individual of animal or plant. And so, for instance, we can have different processes that are involved in the assembly of the microbiota. So, for instance, we can imagine that some microbes can be directly transmitted from the parental generation to the next generation. So we will talk about vertical transmission in that case. But we can also have some event of transmission from of the microbes from one host, another host, not the parental generation, but from another host. And in that case, we can talk about horizontal transfer, horizontal transmission. And on the opposite, we can have the microbes that are present in the environment of the host, but they are free living in the environment, and they can be acquired from the environment. So in that case, we will talk about environmental acquisition. So we have different processes that can be involved in the assembly of the microbiota, and these processes can have different impact over evolutionary over long time scales. And so if we are interested in comparing the microbiota associated with different plant or animal species over a long time scale, one possibility, for instance, is to just at first compare the microbiota composition of different species. So for instance, here, what has been done is to compare the mycorrhizal fungi that are associated with different orchid species. So here it's Dendrobium species. It's an epiphytic plant that is growing on the bark of the trees. So here it's trees, it's always the same trees in China, the same tree species, and the authors, they compare the mycorrhizal fungi that are associated with these different tree species. And here what I show is an NMDS plot, where so basically you compare the composition of the mycorrhizal fungi associated with different samples, so different orchid individual. And if you have two points that are close together in this NMDS plot, it means that the mycorrhizal fungi associated with this different plant individual are similar. And so here what you can see is that each, the color of each dot correspond to a species. And you can see that the individuals, the samples from the same species tend to cluster together, meaning that the samples from the same orchid species tend to be associated, to interact with similar mycorrhizal fungi, so that there are some host species specific microbiota. So And this is something that is quite frequent in animals and plants, the fact that when you compare the microbiota of individuals from the same host species, they tend to be very similar. And here, for instance, in animals, so we look at the, so in this study, we look at the gut microbiota, the bacterial gut microbiota of different lineages of mammals, of birds, amphibians, fishes, etc. And here, each row corresponds to a different animal species. And with the composition of the main bacterial phyla that are present in the microbiota. And here, for instance, you can see that the species of mammals tend to have a microbiota that is quite enriched in Firmicutes bacteria, and for instance, the birds, they tend to have more proteobacteria in purple in their microbiota. So here we can see that species, host species that are closely related tend to have microbiota that are more similar. And this is called a pattern of phylosymbiosis. So it's the fact that closely related host species tend to have more similar microbiota. So it's actually a phylogenetic signal in the composition of the microbiota. And this pattern of phylosymbiosis, it's something that is also very frequent in animals and in plants. So the fact that closely related host species have more similar microbiota. But this is by definition a pattern. And what are the processes that can generate such a pattern of phylosymbiosis? This is not well known, and different processes can have the same consequence and generate the same pattern. So for instance, among the different processes that can generate phylosymbiosis, one of them is just the vertical transmission of the microbes. So for instance, here you have a host phylogeny with 3 different host species, and at the present on the right of the plot, and you have the phylogenetic tree that represents the evolution of the lineages and the speciation event where you have a split in the host phylogeny. And if you imagine that the microbes are vertically transmitted from generation to generation, in that case, and that the microbes are inherited at speciation event, in that case, you will expect the phylogeny of the vertically transmitted microbes to be exactly the same as the phylogeny of the host. So you have a match. You have what we call a co-phylogenetic pattern, where the phylogeny of the host and the phylogeny of the microbes are actually the same. And in that case, you will also have a differentiation of the microbes at the present, and then it will generate a pattern of phylosymbiosis. So vertical transmission can generate a pattern of phylosymbiosis. But there are also other processes that can also generate phylosymbiosis. So for instance, if we imagine a geographic heterogeneity, so for instance, here we have the archipelago of Hawaii, and we assume that on each island of the archipelago, there are different pools of microbes that are free living in the environment. And in that case, so if we have free living environments, and if we have a host phylogeny that is structured by the islands. So here, for instance, we can see that the phylogeny of the host is influenced by the 3 different islands. And in that case, only in the presence of our environmental acquisition, so the different pools that are assembled from the environment. So in that case, we will have the microbiota of the host species that will also present a pattern of phylosymbiosis, but it's only in the case of environmental acquisition. So there is no vertical transmission in that case, but there is a pattern of phylosymbiosis. But here, we do not expect any co-phylogenetic pattern. So we do not expect the host phylogeny and the microbial phylogeny to match. So in this case. So we can see that there are different processes that can also generate phylosymbiosis. So one objective here will be to use eDNA data and metabarcoding technique to understand the evolution of symbiosis. So the goal will be, the method will be the same. We got a sample from the gut, we got sample from the root of plant, and we characterize the microbiota, and we'll try to understand the evolution of symbiosis from this kind of data. So the idea will be we have a host phylogeny that is already reconstructed with different host species, and for each host species, so for instance here, for each plant species, we'll characterize the microbiota using eDNA and metabarcoding, And then once we have this data set, we can do two things. We can first describe the patterns. So just observe the patterns that are present for the microbiota of these different species. And then we can go one step further and we can try to study the processes that can generate the pattern that we are observing. So during this talk, I will have three different parts. The first part, I will talk about how we can use eDNA and metabarcoding in order to characterize the microbiota, but also I will talk about the limits that this type of data have to answer evolutionary questions. Then in the second part, we will look at patterns, and especially we will see how to assess a pattern of phylosymbiosis using interaction networks. And in the last part of my talk, we will try to go one step further and we will try to identify transmitted, so vertically transmitted microbes in the microbiota of different host species. So I guess that you are very familiar after this 1-2 weeks of workshop. So you are very familiar about the pipelines of metabarcoding, but I mean, quickly. So the step is that you're getting your sample from, so for instance, the gut microbiota or the root mycorrhiza, and you will have a step of DNA extraction, and then you will pick one particular DNA region, one particular barcode that you will want to amplify. You will amplify it using PCR, you will sequence it, and then you will have all the DNA sequences, and you will use bioinformatic pipelines in order to cluster these DNA sequences into OTUs, so into operational taxonomic units based on the similarity of these DNA sequences. And so the first step will be to actually to pick a barcode, to choose a DNA region that you want to amplify. So for instance, for the bacteria, you can pick the small subunit of the rRNA region, so the 16S region, or for the fungi, you can use the ITS region, but at most it will be 400, 500 base pairs, so very small regions that are mainly picked in order to identify the species that are present. And actually, so the consequence of that is that you will have amplified DNA regions for the microbes that are DNA regions from genes that are slowly evolving, so that are quite efficient to identify the species that are present, but you will have a very limited amount of information in order to reconstruct the evolutionary history of the microbes. So the primary goal of metabarcoding is not to identify, to reconstruct the microbial evolutionary story, is just to identify them. So we have, it means that in order to look at the evolutionary story of the microbes, we have to take into account the fact that we have a limited amount of information. And the second problem is the fact that the species delineation, the OTU clustering, is quite arbitrary. You have to pick a threshold. So for instance, 95, 97, 99%. And by definition, the way you are making microbial species, it's arbitrary because you have to pick this threshold. So these are the two main problems when we will use metabarcoding data in order to answer evolutionary questions. So in the second part, we will see how to assess pattern of phylosymbiosis, and thanks to interaction networks. So the idea of a pattern of phylosymbiosis, we want to answer the question, do closely related host species tend to have more similar microbiota? And so basically, once you have finished your pipeline of metabarcoding, at the end, you will get an OTU table. So you will have a matrix with the different samples on columns, for instance, and the different OTUs on rows. And you will have in each element of the matrix, you will have the abundance, the number of DNA sequences that correspond to a given OTU in each sample. And in order to evaluate the pattern of phylosymbiosis, you need to go not at the sample level, but at the species level. So actually, you need to transform your OTU table into an interaction network where on columns, you will have the host species, so for instance, the different plant species, and on rows, you will have the different OTUs. So for instance, you can, if you have several samples per host species, you can just take the average of the abundance in each element of the matrix. And so from this interaction network, you can also inform it with the host phylogeny. So you can reconstruct the phylogeny of the plant or the phylogeny of the animals. And you can also reconstruct the phylogeny of all the OTUs that are present in your dataset, in your OTU table. And so once you have this interaction network, you can evaluate, you can test for a pattern of phylosymbiosis. And for doing this, one possibility is to use the mantle test. So with the idea of the mantle test, so you will just measure the phylogenetic signal in the species interaction. And the mantle test is based on the correlation between phylogenetic distances and dissimilarity between sets of microbial partners. So actually, you will do a pairwise computation. So you will take two host species. You can compute the phylogenetic distances between two host species, and you can compute the dissimilarity between the sets of OTUs of two host species. So I will just take an example. So for the phylogenetic distances, let's assume that we have 4 different host species, and we want to have pairwise phylogenetic distances between pairs of host species. So for instance, here, if we assume that the age of the clade is 1 million years, in that case, the phylogenetic distance between host 1 and host 2 will be, so from host 1 to the root, and from the root of the tree to host 2, so it will be 2. And the same, for instance, between host 1 and host 3, and host 1 and host 4. And for instance, the phylogenetic distance between host 3 and host 4 is equal to only 0.5, and you go back until host 4, so the phylogenetic distance will be only 1 between these two host species. Then, once you have the phylogenetic distances, you can compute the dissimilarity between the set of microbial partners, the set of OTUs, and one possibility is to use Jacquard distances. So Jacquard distances is the same. It will be for a pair of host species. You will compute the Jacquard distance, and the definition of the Jacquard distance, it's for a pair of host species. It's equal to the number of non-overlapping partners divided by the total number of partners. So it's equal to the number of non-overlapping OTU divided by the total number of OTUs that are present in these two species. So for instance, here, if we have this interaction network with so 5 different OTUs and 4 different host species, so the Jacquard distance between host 1 and host 2 will be equal to the number of non-overlapping OTU. So the non-overlapping OTU, it's between host 1 and host 2. It's OTU 3 and OTU 5, so 2, divided by the total number of OTU associated with host 1 and host 2, so 4. So 2 divided by 4 equal 0.5. Similarly, for instance, between the Jacquard distance between host 1 and host 3 is equal to the number of non-overlapping OTU. So you have OTU 2 that is non-overlapping, OTU 4 that is non-overlapping, and OTU 5, so it's equal to 3 divided by the total number of OTU present in host 1 and 3 equals to 4. So 3 divided by 4, 0.75, and so on for all the pairwise distances. And so we want to evaluate the correlation between phylogenetic distances and the dissimilarity between the set of microbial partners. So we just compute this correlation. So here we represent the Jacquard distances as a function of the phylogenetic distances. And we can see that when the phylogenetic distances increase, we have also an increase in the Jacquard distances, an increase in the dissimilarity between the set of OTUs associated with this species. So here we have a correlation of 0.12, but we want to be sure that this correlation is significant. So in order to assess, to test for the significance of this correlation, one possibility is to do permutation of the dataset. So we will just randomize the dataset in order to test whether or not this correlation is more important than expected by chance. So we just randomize, for instance, this matrix of Jacquard distances. And we compute the correlation when we have randomized this matrix of Jacquard distances. And so, for instance, so we have in green the original correlation that is equal to 0.12, and in purple we have the distribution of the correlation that are obtained when we randomize, when we do permutation on the data sets. And actually, so we do a lot of permutations, so we can have a distribution, a large distribution like that. And here we can see that on average, the correlation values that we obtain when we are doing a permutation, in that case, in most of the cases, the correlation value are lower than 0.12. So we can conclude that the correlation that we are observing is more important than expected by chance. And we can also have a p-value that is associated with this test. And in that case, the p-value is lower than 0.05. So we can say that there is a significant phylogenetic signal in the dataset, so a significant pattern of phylosymbiosis. But when we look at the distribution on the right, we can see that here, the correlation values that we obtain in purple for the permutation, when we randomize the dataset, we can see that we can obtain correlation values that are high, even by chance. So it means that here we can also compute a p-value. It means that the correlation that we are observing in the dataset is not significant. So it means that there is no phylogenetic signal in the interactions, and so that there is not a significant pattern of phylosymbiosis in this dataset, in these interactions. And so when you perform a mental test, you have you have the R value that indicates the strength of the correlation, the strength of the phylogenetic signal of the pattern of phylosymbiosis, and you have a p-value that indicates whether or not this signal is significant. And during my PhD, we did some study to look at how the mental test can be useful in order to evaluate the pattern of phylosymbiosis, and in particular, when we are working with microbial systems. And we found that actually the Jacquard distances are not very efficient, and that the unifrac distances are better for the microbial systems. And why? It's just because the unifrac distances are based on the phylogenetic information. So you reconstruct the phylogenetic tree of all the microbial OTUs, and you take the phylogenetic relatedness between the species, between the OTUs, in the computation of the dissimilarity. So actually, when you are using unifrac distances, you do not strongly rely on the OTU delineation, on the species delineation, because remember that the species delineation is arbitrary in metabarcoding pipelines. And so you can pick, for instance, 95%, 97%, 99%. And so this OTU, this species delineation, will have a strong impact on the Jacquard distances, but not on the unifrac distances. So for a microbial system, unifrac distances are better, even if there are some uncertainty when you build the microbial phylogenetic tree of the OTUs. And so lastly, we decided to apply this, this mental test, in order to evaluate the presence of phylosymbiosis in orchids. And especially, we use data sets that characterize the mycorrhizal fungi of different orchid species that are present in La Réunion Island. And when we look at whether or not there was a pattern of phylosymbiosis in these orchids, we found that, so here in blue, we found that the pattern of phylosymbiosis is not significant at the level of all the orchids that are present in La Réunion Island. But when we look at one particular clade, a clade here, the Angaricinae, that is a clade of epiphytic orchids, in this clade, we found a significant and strong pattern of phylosymbiosis. So meaning that these particular orchids tend to have a phylogenetic signal in their interaction. So they tend to, closely related epiphytic orchids tend to associate with more similar microbiota. But this is just a pattern, and we don't really know what are the processes that are generating this pattern of phylosymbiosis. And so we have just actually put this work on bioRxiv, and we have proposed a tutorial in order to easily measure the phylogenetic signal in species interaction, so the phylosymbiosis in a given clade of organisms. So now we'll talk about the last part of my talk, but if you have questions about how to measure pattern of phylosymbiosis, don't hesitate if it was not really clear.
Yeah, perhaps just a question. Indeed, you mentioned that, so that's true that OTUs are completely subjective depending on the threshold and so on. But I was wondering also about the abundance, because finally in the unifrac distance you don't take into account the abundance. That's it.
There is so it's the generalized unifrac where you can take into account the abundance.
Okay. Because
actually, definitely it's really so I don't have the slide on that, but it's really improving the computation when you take into account both the abundance of the interaction and the phylogenetic information. So the generalized unifracs, you can do both, and it's the best distances to compute the phylosymbiosis, to evaluate the phylosymbiosis.
Okay. No, that's interesting, because indeed that's true that we had some debates about how do we take into account the rare species, and that's a major problem also with the MiSeq, with the sensibility and the contaminants. So knowing that indeed we had a look at the Hill numbers, and the fact that Hill numbers can be a way to correct a bit from the abundance of rare species, but also the generalized unifrac would be a good method. I don't know if there are questions from the attendees for now.
Not so far.
Okay. Well, I think we'll go on and have some discussion later. Thank you, Benoit.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so in the last part of the talk, I will mention how we can use some approaches in order to go one step further and try to study the processes that are generating the pattern of phylosymbiosis. And more particularly, we will try to use some approaches in order to identify the transmitted microbes. So what are the microbes, what are the OTUs that are vertically transmitted? So for instance, for each OTU that is present, so you have a host phylogeny, you characterize using metabarcoding the microbiota of each host species, and you want to know whether or not one given OTU, and each OTU independently, has been vertically transmitted or not during the evolution of the clade of host. And this is kind of a classical question. The idea of studying the transmission of a given symbiont, of a given organism that is associated with host. And here the idea is that for one given OTU, we can take one representative sequence per host species. So for instance, here we have 3 different host species, and we can take, for one given OTU, for OTU1, we can take one representative sequence that is the most abundant sequence per host species. And so here, what we will use is a variation within an OTU. So we will have the intra-OTU variation that we will use. So for instance, here you can see that for this OTU, the DNA sequence is not the same for the different host species. And the tools that are existing currently for looking at vertical transmission, the first step was to build the phylogenetic tree of the OTU. So you take one representative sequence per host species, and you build the phylogenetic tree of the OTU. And so once you have the phylogenetic tree of the OTU, it exists 2 different kinds of approach. The first approach is the correlative approach, where you will just look at the match between the host phylogeny and the phylogenetic tree of the OTU, because you remember that under the hypothesis of vertical transmission, you expect the host phylogeny and the microbial phylogeny, the OTU phylogeny, to be similar, and you expect a co-phylogenetic pattern. And so, for instance, the Parafit or the PACO methods are developed for measuring the correlation, the congruence between the host phylogeny and the OTU phylogeny. And the second type of approaches for looking at vertical transmission is to use event-based approaches, so model-based approaches. And for instance, the idea of model-based approaches will be to try to fit events that can explain why the OTU phylogeny and the host phylogeny are not directly similar. So for instance, here you can see that the OTU phylogeny is different from the host phylogeny. And for instance, you can explain this difference by the fact that one horizontal transfer happened during the evolution of the OTU. And so for instance, here you can imagine that one transfer happened between the humans and the gorilla, and that the OTU sequence from the human has replaced the OTU sequence from the gorilla. In that case, it can explain why the OTU phylogenetic tree is different from the host phylogeny. So these are event-based approaches, and ALE is one of the event-based approaches that exist to look at the microbial vertical transmission. But the problem is that all these methods, so the correlative approaches and the event-based approaches, they rely first on the reconstruction of the phylogenetic tree of the OTU. But we have seen that using metabarcoding data, we have a very limited amount of information. So we have very short barcodes with slowly evolving genes. So it means that we have not a lot of information to reconstruct this phylogenetic tree. So we don't have robust phylogenetic tree that are built at the end. And that can be a problem when we want to look at vertical transmissions. So during my PhD, actually, we have developed a new tool in order to study vertical transmission. But this tool, so the name is HOME for host microbiota evolution, this approach, this tool do not rely on the reconstruction of the phylogeny of the OTU. We directly model the evolution of the DNA sequences of the OTU on the host phylogeny. So we take the DNA sequences that can be different. So we use the intra-OTU variation, and we will directly model the evolution of these DNA sequences on the host phylogeny. So we will just assume a model of DNA evolution, and given a model of DNA evolution, we can compute the likelihood of our model. So the likelihood is just the probability of observing these DNA sequences given a model of evolution that is based on the host phylogeny. So we'll give some examples. So here, for instance, if we assume a strict vertical transmission, we will have the DNA sequences that will have directly evolved on the host phylogeny. So just strict vertical transmission. And we can compute the probability of observing these DNA sequences on that has evolved on this host phylogeny. And we can also assume that some horizontal transfer are possible. So for instance, here we have one horizontal transfer from the human to the gorilla. And in that case, the evolutionary history of the OTU will be quite different. So here it's the phylogeny, the evolutionary history of the OTU1 given this horizontal transfer. And we can still compute the likelihood associated with this model. So we can compute the probability of observing these DNA sequences, this DNA alignment, given the evolutionary scenario. And so for the model of DNA evolution, we will just use a very simple model of evolution where we only have substitution, where we only have mutation. And so we will have one parameter here that is mu, that is the mutation rate of the DNA. And so the idea will be that from these DNA sequences of this OTU, we will have two parameters that we want to estimate. It's the mutation rate of the DNA for this OTU and the number of horizontal transfer. So for each OTU, we have these two parameters, and we have developed a maximum likelihood estimation framework in order to estimate these two parameters. And so for a given OTU, we have estimated the mutation rate and the number of horizontal transfer, but it's the same as for the mental test. We want to be sure that the parameters that we have estimated are significant. It means we want to be sure that these parameters are more likely than a scenario of independent evolution. So in order to do that, it's exactly as for the mental test. We just have to randomize, to do permutation on the data sets. So for instance, we can randomize the association between one host species and one DNA sequence. We randomize the data set, and once we have the randomized DNA alignment, we can run again our approach. So we will estimate again the parameters, the mutation rate, and the number of horizontal transfer for this permutation, for this null hypothesis of independent evolution. And by comparing the original parameters with the parameters that are generating with permutation, with randomization, we can reject or not the null hypothesis of independent evolution. So if we reject the null hypothesis of independent evolution, it means that we have vertically transmitted OTU. And if we do not reject the null hypothesis of independent evolution, it means that the OTU has been likely acquired from the environment. So it has not been vertically transmitted. So the first step has been to validate our approach using simulation. So we simulated on a host phylogeny, we simulated OTUs that are vertically transmitted, OTUs that are vertically transmitted with horizontal transfers, and OTUs that are evolving independently from the host phylogeny, so OTUs that are acquired from the environment. And so these first simulations, they enable us to compute the statistical power of our approach. So it's just the percentage of true positive, the percentage of OTUs that are vertically transmitted and that we found as being vertically transmitted with our approach. And the last simulation, it's for evaluating the type 1 error rate of our approach. So to evaluate the percentage of false positives, means the percentage of OTUs that are independently evolving, but that we found as being vertically transmitted. So we want the statistical power to be as high as important, and we want the type 1 error rate to be as low as possible. And so here are the result of some simulations. So here we represent in orange the transmitted OTU, and in purple the OTUs that are acquired from the environment, so that are independently evolving. And we represent the percentage of OTU that reject or not the null hypothesis of independent evolution. So in green, it's the OTU that are not rejecting the null hypothesis of independent evolution, meaning that it's the OTU that are not vertically transmitted. And in red, it's the OTU that reject the null hypothesis of independent evolution. So it's the OTU that are likely to be vertically transmitted. And you can see that on average, 50% of the transmitted OTU are found as being transmitted OTU. So it means that we have a statistical power that is quite good. And when we have simulated OTU in purple that are acquired from the environment, in most of the cases, we do not reject the null hypothesis of independent evolution, meaning that these OTUs are not considered as being vertically transmitted. So it means that when we are using our approach and when an OTU rejects the null hypothesis of independent evolution, it means that this OTU is very likely to be vertically transmitted. So once we have validated our approach using simulation, we wanted to apply it on different systems, and especially in the gut microbiota of animals. And first, we look at the gut microbiota of great apes, of different primate species. And we know that for primate, for instance, there is a significant and strong pattern of phylosymbiosis that is present. And we wanted to know whether the pattern of phylosymbiosis in the gut microbiota of primate was due to vertical transmission of the bacterial OTUs. So we gather a data set of gut microbiota of primate that is based on the 16S barcode, and we perform OTU clustering with different threshold of similarity. And for each OTU, we run our approach in order to evaluate whether or not this OTU has been vertically transmitted during the evolution of the primates. And here we represent the percentage of OTU that reject the null hypothesis of independent evolution, so the percentage of OTU that are vertically transmitted. And here you can see in orange that between 10 to 15% of the OTUs have been vertically transmitted during the evolution of primates. So it means that vertical transmission can participate to the pattern of phylosymbiosis that is present in primates, in great apes. And so we wanted to know whether this pattern, this process of vertical transmission can also participate to the pattern of phylosymbiosis that is present in other animal clades. And so, for instance, we look at spiders. So a genus of spiders that is present in the archipelago of Hawaii and for which a significant pattern of phylosymbiosis has been found. And we wanted to know whether this pattern of phylosymbiosis was due to vertical transmission. So we took the bacterial gut microbiota of the spiders, and for each OTU, we run again our approach home in order to know whether or not it has been vertically transmitted. And in this system, we found that it's different from the primates. We found that almost all the OTU did not reject the null hypothesis of independent evolution, meaning that in this system, in these spiders, most of the OTUs are not transmitted. They are likely all acquired from the environment. Last part, we have developed a new approach that can be used to detect vertically transmitted OTUs, and especially to know whether or not these vertically transmitted OTUs can generate a pattern of phylosymbiosis. And we have shown that more than 5% of the gut bacteria that are present in primates are vertically transmitted during the evolution of the primate then. And we have also shown that it exists different dynamics of transmission across the different animal lineages with almost no transmission in the spiders, for instance. And so to conclude on this presentation, so it's kind of possible to use eDNA and metabarcoding techniques in order to look and to understand the evolution of symbiosis once you correct for the many biases that can be present and the fact that you have a limited amount of information, and you can still describe pattern and study the process when you correct for all the potential bias that are associated with metabarcoding data. So thank you for listening, and thanks for the invitation, Melanie, and I would be very happy to discuss during the remaining time.
Well, thanks a lot, Benoit. It's always a pleasure to listen for you. Indeed, I always learn a bit more. So do we have questions? I will go outside because my companion has a meeting in the meantime. Do we have questions?